Mayor Karen Bass thought no one would find out, but Marjorie Taylor Greene walked in with proof. Emails, testimonies, data, all pointing to a secret policy that let violent criminals walk free. The moment she dropped the evidence, the room froze. This wasn't a debate. It was an expose, and the evidence was undeniable. By the end, D.C. was in shock. Stay with us because what comes next will change how you see immigration enforcement in America. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss the moments they tried to keep hidden. Marjorie Taylor Greene took her seat. It was clear this wouldn't be business as usual. With the Capitol dome behind her and the nation watching, Greene leaned into the microphone, her tone sharper than usual. She wasn't here to debate policy. She was here to expose something much deeper, something she claimed most Americans had no idea was happening. Let the record show, she began, that federal law is being actively ignored in one of our largest cities, and the consequences are deadly. The room went still. She held up a folder. Inside affidavit, incident reports, and what she called direct evidence of a covert agreement between Mayor Karen Bass's office and ICE. An agreement, she said, not to cooperate. But here's where things took a strange turn. Greene wasn't accusing Bass of working with ICE. She was accusing her of secretly blocking them, denying access to federal databases, interfering with deportations, even instructing LAPD officers to withhold information from federal agents. According to Greene, it was all done under the cover of a local sanctuary ordinance. This isn't just negligence, she said, flipping to a page marked confidential. This is obstruction, and people are dying because of it. The committee erupted in murmurs. Across the aisle, Representative Linda Sanchez raised an eyebrow. Are you accusing a sitting mayor of violating federal law? She asked, her voice measured. I'm not accusing, Greene shot back. I'm showing you the evidence. And with that, she handed the folder to the clerk. Cameras zoomed in as the first few pages were distributed. Case files, fingerprint logs, records of arrested individuals flagged by ICE, but released under the city's hands-off policy. One case in particular stood out. A man deported twice, arrested again for assault, and released without so much as a phone call to federal agents. Why was ICE blocked? Greene asked, locking eyes with the committee chair. Why was this man allowed to walk free? And who gave the order? No one answered, because the person she was really asking wasn't in the room yet, but she would be. Mayor Karen Bass had been subpoenaed, and according to the schedule, she was due to testify before the end of the session. That's when the tension shifted. Everyone in the room knew the stakes were high, but now it felt like something bigger. This wasn't just about immigration. It was about federal authority, city defiance, and whether laws still meant anything in a country this divided. One thing was certain. By the end of the day, someone's reputation wouldn't survive, and Greene had just fired the opening shot. As the hearing resumed, Greene turned to a large screen behind her. On it flashed a map of Los Angeles. Different neighborhoods lit up. East Hollywood, South Central, Pico, Union. Each dot represented a suspect flagged by ICE for removal. Each had been released. This isn't theoretical, Greene said. These are real people, real crimes, real victims. She clicked the remote. First, a mugshot appeared. Then another and another. Jose R. Hernandez, twice deported, arrested for felony battery in Koreatown, released within 24 hours. Lisa M. Gonzalez, illegal reentry after removal, armed robbery charge, downtown L.A., no ICE contact. Manuel Chavez, trafficker, flagged for detainer, released anyway. Gasps rippled through the room. These aren't isolated mistakes, Greene continued. Their policy. At the witness table, a former ICE field officer named Daniel Mercer adjusted his tie. He'd worked the LA district for 12 years. Today he wasn't holding back. We used to get routine cooperation, Mercer said. But over the past 2 years, access was restricted. Biometric data was delayed or denied. Local law enforcement stopped returning our calls. Were you ever told why? Asked Greene. Mercer nodded. Internal memos, orders from the top. They cited L.A.'s sanctuary ordinance. Greene leaned in. And what did that mean in practical terms? It meant, Mercer replied, that violent offenders we were trying to remove were being released back onto the streets. On the opposite end of the panel, Representative Maxwell Frost shifted in his seat. Are you suggesting that Mayor Bass personally issued these orders? Mercer didn't flinch. What I'm saying is that IC had cooperation until the mayor signed Executive Order 41B. After that, everything changed. A copy of the order was entered into the record. Its language was vague, but buried in Section 3 was the phrase Greene was waiting for. No municipal entity shall voluntarily provide federal agencies with biometric data absent a judicial warrant. She pointed to it on the screen. There it is, she said. This is the legal firewall that's letting criminal aliens avoid deportation. A silence followed. No one disputed the text. The only question left was why. Why would a city deliberately block federal enforcement? And that's when Greene said it. Because there was a deal, a back-channel arrangement, and I intend to show you exactly how it worked. The room stiffened. From behind the D's, a staffer approached Greene with a note. She glanced down, then looked toward the gallery. She's here, Greene announced. Mayor Karen Bass has arrived. There was no applause, only the quiet turning of heads and the sudden tension of knowing everything was about to change. Bass stepped into the chamber, calm but unreadable, and the confrontation that no one thought would happen was about to begin. Mayor Karen Bass took her seat before the panel. Her expression was steady, hands folded, her gaze locked on the lawmakers in front of her. She didn't flinch, even as Greene's eyes narrowed across the aisle. We thank you for being here, said the committee chair. Let's begin. But Greene didn't wait for formalities. Mayor Bass, she said, are you aware that your office has denied ICE access to fingerprint data from Sateran jails? Buss responded calmly. Congresswoman, Los Angeles follows federal law where it is constitutionally applied. Our sanctuary policy is designed to protect families, not shield criminals. Then explain this, Greene said, holding up a printed arrest report. This man was picked up on domestic violence charges. IC issued a detainer. Your jail released him without notice. 3 weeks later, he assaulted another woman. Do you call that protection? Bass kept her voice measured. That man should have faced justice. But local cooperation with ICE has created fear in immigrant communities. Victims stop reporting crimes. Witnesses disappear. Our policies are about preserving trust. Greene leaned back slightly. So trust is more important than enforcement? No, Bass replied. Trust is essential to enforcement. The room stirred. It wasn't a simple yes or no answer, but it wasn't evasive either. Representative Jim Jordan cut in. Mayor, do you acknowledge that under your administration over 300 individuals flagged by ICE were released without so much as a phone call to federal agents? Buss nodded. Yes, because the federal government must follow due process too. We don't hold people indefinitely without a warrant. That's the law. But you deny ICE access to biometric databases, Jordan added. We require a warrant, Bass clarified. Greene didn't let go. That's a technicality, and you know it. She said you're using paperwork as a shield for political decisions. Meanwhile, IC agents are left in the dark and violent offenders are walking free. She turned to the screen again. Another face. Another victim. A mother from Boyle Heights whose son was killed by a man with 2 prior deportations. Greene paused. The room fell silent. Mayor, she said, what do you say to her? Buss looked straight ahead. I say our system failed, but not because of sanctuary. Policy, because of fragmentation. Federal and local authorities are fighting each other instead of working together. And you don't think your ordinance caused that. I think Washington's refusal to fix immigration law caused that. It was the first moment of visible tension between them. Greene shook her head slightly. clearly unsatisfied. "This isn't about fixing immigration," she said. "This is about whether cities can ignore federal law just because they disagree with it." The committee chair tapped the gavel lightly. "Let's stay on topic." But the topic had already shifted. This wasn't just about ICE anymore. It was about authority, about power, about who gets to decide what laws get enforced and when. And with both women now fully engaged, it was clear this hearing was far from over. Greene stood again. Her team rolled a mobile whiteboard into the chamber covered in documents, color-coded charts, and email excerpts. This wasn't theater. It was strategy. "Let's talk about communication," she said, walking toward the board. "Specifically, what the mayor's office told law enforcement behind closed doors." She pointed to an email chain between the LA mayor's public safety director and LAPD command staff. The subject line coordination protocol IC interaction. "This directive," Greene said, "instructed officers not to initiate contact with IC under any circumstance unless approved directly by City Hall." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Not by legal review, not by a judge, not even by probable cause, just political approval." Mayor Bass looked on unmoved. The next slide displayed an internal LAPD memo labeled for internal distribution only. In it, officers were told that detaining individuals flagged by IC without a warrant could result in disciplinary action, even if that person had a criminal record. "This isn't protection," Greene said. "This is obstruction. Plain and simple." Representative Chip Roy jumped in. "Mayor, was his policy your idea?" "I approved the framework," Bass said, "but it was based on years of advocacy, court proceeding, and public safety priorities. I won't apologize for protecting our communities from unconstitutional overreach." Greene raised her voice slightly. "Then why were your policies never publicly debated before being enacted?" Buss kept her tone even. "Because they were within executive authority, just as governors use executive orders." "But you're not a governor," Roy snapped. "You're running a city. And that city is turning into a sanctuary for crime." That landed harder than expected. For a moment, even members of Bass's own party looked uncomfortable. Then Greene flipped one last slide. It showed a timeline. On one side, the day Executive Order 41B was signed. On the other, a sharp drop in ICE detainer notifications from Los Angeles jails. The decline was immediate, drastic. This wasn't a gradual change, Greene said. This was a policy wall. And what's worse, she moved to the next column. In that same time frame, we saw a 29% increase in reoffenders who had prior ICE flags, assaults, duas, battery, and in one case, attempted murder. Silence. Bass responded carefully. Correlation doesn't mean causation. Cities across the country have seen increases in post-pandemic crime. You're cherry-picking numbers to support a narrative. No, Greene replied. We're connecting dots. Dots you tried to bury. At the edge of the room, a DOJ liaison raised an eyebrow, jotting something down. This wasn't just a headline anymore. It was turning into a case file. The tension in the chamber deepened. Some watched Greene, others watched Bass. But everyone now understood this wasn't just political. It was personal, and it was building towards something bigger. The next witness was called forward. Her name was Ana Delgado, a former L.A. County Corrections officer. Nervous but resolute, she adjusted the microphone and looked straight ahead. She had seen too much to stay quiet. I served in the county jail system for 8 years, she began, and I was told more than once not to speak with federal agents. The room leaned in. Greene nodded for her to continue. I received an email in March, Ana said, from our regional commander. It instructed us to avoid cooperating with ICE unless the detainee posed an immediate and extreme threat to public safety. What does that mean, extreme threat? Asked Representative Boebert. Ana hesitated. That was never defined. And how many times, Greene asked, were I agents turned away? Ana looked down at her notes. In my unit alone, 22 times in 2 months. We had federal detainers, and we were told to ignore them. The chamber stirred again. This time, the press gallery was taking notes faster. Were these orders coming from the jail commander? Greene asked. No, higher than that, Honor replied. From the mayor's liaison on immigration policy. That landed like a bomb. Mayor Bass, still seated at the witness table, shook her head slightly. That's a mischaracterization, she said. We provided guidance in accordance with legal precedent, not instructions to defy the law, Greene shot back. Then why are your own officers testifying under oath that they were told to ignore federal warrants? Buss didn't answer right away. Representative. Dan Bishop leaned forward. Do you dispute this officer's statement? I dispute the implication. Buss said, our office sought to prevent profiling and overreach, not to shield dangerous individuals. Anna's voice cut back in. With respect, Mayor, we let a man go in April who'd been flagged by IC for gang activity. I filed a concern report. Nothing happened. That man was arrested again in May. Armed robbery? That was it. Not an accusation, not a theory, a first-hand account. The weight of Anna's words settled into the room like fog. Everyone felt it. Even the staffers who had been quietly checking their phones were now sitting upright. Greene turned to the chairman. Mr. Chair, I'd like this committee to issue a subpoena for internal communications between the mayor's office and LAPD command staff, especially any correspondence related to ICE detainers or sanctuary enforcement. The chairman paused, then nodded. So noted. We will deliberate. Across the room, a hush fell. What started as a heated policy debate had now taken a different form. This was no longer just political grandstanding. This was the groundwork for legal discovery. And suddenly, every word was being measured. Every claim now had consequences. What happened next wasn't on the official agenda. Greene looked down at a sealed manila envelope just handed to her by a staffer. She opened it, skimmed the contents, then slowly raised her eyes toward the panel. We've just received internal city communications obtained through a whistleblower, she said, her tone measured. These emails raised new questions about the intent behind Los Angeles' sanctuary policy. The room tensed. She held up a printout. At the top was a redacted city email sent from the Office of Community Engagement to the mayor's legal counsel. The subject IC access strategy priority language Greene read aloud ensure that all policy language includes discretionary terms such as voluntary on request or at the department's discretion. Goal is to provide political flexibility while maintaining a practical firewall against ICE. She looked directly at Bass. This wasn't about safety. This was about plausible deniability. Bass exhaled sharply. That's an interpretation of bureaucratic language, not a smoking gun. No, Greene replied. It's a blueprint. She handed the email to the clerk for the record. Representative Mike Waltz leaned forward. Mayor, did your office ever consult with ICE about the potential public safety impacts of your order before issuing it? Bass didn't hesitate. No. Why not? Because IC does not govern our city. We govern it. We work with the community, not around them. Waltz pressed, even if that means releasing criminals. We don't release criminals, Bass snapped. We release people who have not been convicted. That's the law. That remark triggered a visible reaction. Even a few Democrats on the panel exchanged glances. Greene stood again. You say you release people who haven't been convicted, but the evidence shows you've also released individuals who were convicted, who served time and were then flagged for deportation. And still your system blocked ICE. She walked back to the whiteboard and circled a name. Diego Fuentes, convicted of grand theft, served 14 months. IC flagged him. LAPD released him on your order. 2 months later, he was caught trafficking fentanyl across the state line. Bass said nothing because there was nothing to say. The truth was now threaded throughout the hearing like barbed wire. Carefully worded policies were starting to look like calculated obstructions. And the more documents Greene unveiled, the clearer it became that the sanctuary policy wasn't just passive resistance. It was engineered silence. A silence that had real consequences. Representative Elise Stefanik leaned in. Madame Mayor, if it's proven that your office deliberately obstructed ICE access to known felons, would you support a federal investigation? Buss sat quietly, her hands folded once more. I would support a constitutional review, but not a political. Attack disguised as oversight. Greene didn't blink. Then you better get ready because the Department of Justice was already listening. With the hearing now past its third hour, the energy in the chamber had shifted. No one was scrolling phones. No one was whispering to colleagues. Everyone was locked in, waiting for what Greene would reveal next. She clicked the final slide onto the screen behind her, a spreadsheet filled with rows of data. This, she said, is the citywide log of IC detainer requests obtained via federal FOIA requests. Over 1,000 N-100 flagged individuals in the last 18 months. Only 76 were honored. Gasps. Pencils froze mid-air. Cameras clicked. Now, let's look closer, Greene continued. She zoomed in on a subset of cases. Repeat offenders. Of those 1,100, she said 281 had prior criminal convictions. At least 72 had been deported before, and 38, let me say that again, 38 were arrested for violent crimes after being released. Bass shifted slightly in her seat. These aren't numbers, Greene said, voice steady. These are decisions. City policy. Allow 38 dangerous men to walk free, not because of the law, but because of politics. She tapped the screen. These were preventable crimes. The chair turned to Bass. Madame Mayor, are you disputing these numbers? Buss looked directly at him. We haven't had time to review that data, and we don't know how many of those cases were dismissed or wrongly flagged. Greene fired back. That's the point. You never reviewed it because the policy wasn't built to analyze. It was built to deflect. The panel murmured again. But Greene wasn't finished. Let me read something, she said, pulling out another document. This is a sworn deposition from an IC supervisor in the LA field office. She read aloud. We were routinely denied access to holding facilities. In some instances, local officers were instructed to delay fingerprinting until ICE had left the premises. She stopped. That's obstruction. Bass took a slow breath. It's hearsay. No, Greene replied. It's sworn testimony, and it's backed by the data. Representative Jim Banks leaned into the mic. Mayor, why would your city delay fingerprinting? Who benefits from that? Bass hesitated. Sometimes the system slows down. Not everything is intentional. That wasn't a denial. Greene closed her binder. So let's be clear. This committee has evidence of 1, a written policy that limits ICE access. 2, first-hand testimony of intentional interference. 3, statistical proof of public safety failures. And now 4, depositions pointing to deliberate obstruction. She paused, looking around the room. We're no longer asking if this happened. We're asking how far it went and who else was involved. The committee chair cleared his throat. I suggest we recess for a short break. But everyone knew what that really meant. The next phase was coming, the legal phase, and Washington had just been given a roadmap. The hearing resumed after a 15-minute recess, but the atmosphere was different. Staffers returned with urgency. Reporters whispered updates into microphones. Members of Congress leaned in more closely. Something had shifted. Representative Anna Paulina Luna was the first to speak. Madame Mayor, earlier you stated that ICE detainer requests were not being honored due to legal concerns. Would you agree that the blanket denial of all requests, regardless of the offense, is not case-by-case discretion? Buss answered slowly. We aimed for consistency. That's how policy works. But consistency isn't justice, Luna replied. Consistency is only valuable when it's applied lawfully. Greene took it from there. Mayor Bass, I want to return to a specific date, October 17th of last year. A man named Ricardo Salgado was arrested on charges of aggravated assault. IC had flagged him. He was released within 36 hours. She pulled out the arrest summary. 2 weeks. Later, Salgado was arrested again, this time for stabbing a store clerk during a robbery. Greene's voice dropped slightly. That clerk died 2 days later. Bass closed her eyes for half a second, but said nothing. This is what happens when ideology overrides enforcement, Greene said. And you can call that political, but the victims' family calls it something else. Representative Byron Donalds leaned in. Mayor, if even a fraction of this committee's findings are verified, are you prepared to revise your city's sanctuary policies? I'm prepared to review any policy that puts lives at risk, Bass answered carefully. But you won't revoke it. I won't. Dismantle trust with immigrant communities based on a political inquisition. Greene responded sharply. So it's trust for one group and silence for the victims. That landed. Even those sympathetic to Bass were running out of ground to defend. Suddenly, a staffer slipped a note to the committee chair. He read it, paused, then looked up. This just in. According to a DOJ official, the department is reviewing this committee's evidence and will issue a formal response within 48 hours. The room stirred again. This wasn't just oversight anymore. It was a trigger point. Greene stood once more. I want this to be clear. This is not about immigration. It's about enforcement. And when a city rewrites its own playbook to block federal law, people get hurt. She glanced at Bass one final time. And when we come back, I'll be introducing a resolution calling for a federal investigation into the city of Los Angeles for obstruction of justice. No one spoke. They didn't have to. The room knew exactly what that meant. By the next morning, the headlines had already started spreading. Mayor Bass under fire in ICE blockade scandal. Congress demands DOJ probe into LA's sanctuary policy. Whistleblower. Evidence points to criminal obstruction. But inside the Capitol, the committee was back in session. This time behind closed doors reviewing the classified portions of the evidence Greene's team had secured. Communications between city departments, internal memos, redacted but damning. One document stood out, an internal directive from the mayors. Legal counsel to department heads dated just days before the sanctuary order was signed. It read, all interagency requests related to immigration enforcement must be routed through OCE, no direct contact with federal agents unless pre-approved. It wasn't just policy, it was control. Word of the document leaked within hours, and once it did, Greene requested an emergency motion to unseal the hearing record and make the evidence public. This can't sit in a vault, she told the press. The American people need to see it. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, reporters gathered outside City Hall. Council members were blindsided. Civil rights groups called for calm. Protesters began to organize on both sides. Bus held a brief press conference that afternoon. Standing before a dozen cameras, she said, Los Angeles remains committed to protecting all communities. We reject scapegoating. We will cooperate fully with any lawful review. But her tone had changed. There was no defiance, no deflection, just damage control. On the Hill, Representative James Carmer joined Greene's call for a federal probe. What we're seeing here, he said, isn't a disagreement about immigration. It's a pattern of interference that may rise to the level of criminal obstruction. DOJ officials confirmed they had opened a preliminary inquiry. It wasn't an indictment, but it was a fuse. Back inside the hearing room, Greene sat silently at her desk, organizing papers. A staffer leaned in and whispered, They didn't think you'd get this far. Greene didn't smile. We're not done yet. Because the final chapter wasn't about headlines. It was about action. And the moment was coming. 3 days later, under the rotunda of the Capitol, Greene stood before a bank of microphones. In her hand was a formal petition addressed to the Department of Justice, signed by over 40 members of Congress demanding a full-scale investigation into the city of Los Angeles for obstruction of federal immigration enforcement. The facts are, No longer in dispute, she said firmly. We have the data, the memos, the testimony. We have a whistleblower, and we now have a duty to act. It wasn't just a media play. It was the next step in a coordinated campaign to hold the city accountable. The petition outlined specific allegations: interference with lawful federal detainer requests, intentional delays in fingerprint processing, written policies designed to create legal loopholes, failure to notify ICE of high-risk individuals, flagged for removal. At the center of it all, the sanctuary ordinance signed by Mayor Karen Bass. That same day, Greene's resolution was read aloud on the House floor. It called for immediate oversight hearings, DOJ cooperation, and the suspension of federal funding to any municipality proven to obstruct immigration enforcement. It drew applause from some and fury from others. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called it a dangerous abuse of power targeting local autonomy. But Greene didn't back down. This isn't about targeting cities, she said. It's about protecting citizens. And if Los Angeles can do this unchecked, so can every other city. Behind the scenes, DOJ officials confirmed that subpoenas were being prepared. The case was moving quietly but quickly. By week's end, 3 top officials in the Los Angeles mayor's office had retained legal counsel. The city's legal team scrambled to manage fallout, and ICE issued a rare public statement praising the committee's efforts. The message was clear. The game had changed. For years, the immigration debate had been waged in courtrooms, press conferences, and policy memos. But now it had entered a new phase, one where local defiance of federal law had real legal consequences. And for Greene, this wasn't just a victory. It was a warning to every mayor, every council, every city tempted to play politics with public safety because someone had drawn a line. And this time, Washington wasn't looking the other way.